Welcome to week 7. Week 6 was the kind of the last part of clauses and some of the legalities of doing a commercial real estate transaction. 3 people attempted the homework, and I congratulate those 3 people for attempting it. I know it was a very, very difficult homework assignment. For the 2 of you that I received the homework this morning, and I believe the last one was last night, I'll try to get to marking those later today. So, week 7, welcome. Commercial property features. So, this is for buyers for commercial property types. And when I say buyers, I mean tenants as well. And I should change that so it says for buyers and tenants. But assuming that you have a buyer or a tenant as a client, you know, what's important. This is, you know, virtually the same as residential. Location, location, location. That is the, you know, one of the mantras of real estate. It's where do you want to be? We had a conversation earlier this week with an agent who said, what do you do when somebody calls and says, well, anywhere from Barrie to Pickering and down to Toronto and maybe over to Oshawa and going west over to Hamilton. Can you find me a place there? Well, you know, no, that's really difficult to do. If somebody is asking you for such a large geographical location, then they are looking for a deal. They don't care where they buy, they want something incredibly inexpensive. And sometimes those guys have called, it's usually a hint that those guys have called 20 other real estate agents as well. So be wary of people who say that to you. You know, sure, I'll look for you, but I need you to sign a buyer representation agreement. You know, would be one of the first things out of my mouth if somebody came to me and said that kind of thing. You need to talk to them honestly about the rent or purchase price. And as I try to teach new agents, when you're asking for a purchase price, or in this case, rent as well, then the trick is the psychology of sales, I should say, not necessarily a trick, but it's the psychology of sales states that you should not ask for a specific amount. When you ask for a specific amount that somebody is willing to spend, then subconsciously or even sometimes consciously, that person will believe that no matter what they do, they will have to spend that amount, all right? What you should always ask for is a range of values. When you ask somebody for a purchase price, you shouldn't say, so how much do you want to buy for? You should say, what range of values are you interested in purchasing, all right? Because people might be good to purchase something for $600,000, but that's at the very top end of their budget, and they much rather buy something at $500,000 or something between $500,000 and $600,000. And so if you ask for a range, what you get is kind of a more realistic number that they're interested in. Agents typically, if a buyer would typically say $600,000, then typically agents, what they do is they immediately focus in on that price. If you get somebody to tell you that their range is 500 to 600,000, and you start to show them places, for example, at 525 or 550, and they don't like it, then you know that they can spend a little bit more, all right? Most people want to spend less than what their maximum amount is in the commercial world. Why? In the commercial world, most people want to spend less because a dollar saved equals not having to make a sale. Okay? Does everybody understand that? And I always have to ask this question because it's always so quiet. Does everybody hear me? Does anybody hear me?
Yes,
yes.
I can hear you.
Okay, thank you.
Loud and clear, John.
Okay, thank you.
Take time to unmute and then talk and then mute back.
I know. It's always so quiet that, you know, in the class, I can kind of, in the classroom setting, of course, I can see everybody and what's going on. So thank you very much for the response. I appreciate it. When it comes to rent, it's a little more, it's the range, of course, is not so important. In rent, yes, I'd like to spend $3,000 a month. But even with rent, you could say, what range of rent are you looking at? And most people will say 2,500 to 3,000, right? And that gives you an idea that their max is 3,000, but they rather only spend 2,500. So continuing to show them rents at 3,000, if that's the only number that you have, you may find the buyer kind of drifting away from you, or sorry, in this case, the tenant drifting away from you because it's always 3,000, 3,000, 3,000. They may have another real estate agent looking for them that is looking at 2,500, 2,500, 2,500. And guess what? They're going to get the place at 2,500 in the commercial world. $500 a month lease in a commercial property. Easy to do the math on that, guys. That's $6,000 a year that they save, right? And that's $6,000 if they're selling chocolate bars. Oh my goodness gracious, that's a lot of chocolate bars that they have to sell to make up that $6,000 difference. So I do recommend that you ask for ranges, okay? Of course, what are they looking for? Well, you have to narrow down. I know that seems obvious, but the agents do have to make sure that you know what they are looking for. So these things are across all similar types. You really have to narrow it down to some degree on what they are looking for. Common property features, square footage. What size is the buyer looking for? There's no point in guessing at this. I had a conversation with an agent who was looking for a dentist, and they just couldn't find anything. And my first question out of my mouth was, well, what size property are they looking for? And the agent said, I don't know. And I said, well, I don't know how you're narrowing down the search pattern if you don't know. And he says, well, how does the dentist know? And I said, you know what? A dentist knows pretty much down to the square foot what they want. When a dentist is being trained in the Ontario Dental Association, the ODA, when they take those courses, they are trained about sizes of offices. How big do they want their office to be? Do they need room to grow? Okay. Just about everybody knows this. If it's a retail store, people know. If it's a hairdressing salon, how many chairs do you need? That kind of thing. Washrooms, very common question. Do you need specific requirements? Do you need handicap access? In my dentist office where I go to in Crosby subdivision, in Crosby in Richmond Hill, the washroom is down the hall. You have to go through a door. You have to ask for a key. Is that good enough? Or does the dentist want their own office? TMI, of course, is a huge one. TMI stands for taxes, maintenance, and insurance. How much and what are the escalation parameters? What that means is for TMI is TMI is basically calculated by square footage as well. And it only really applies to year one, all right? The following year, the taxes, maintenance, and insurance are going to go up prorated by how much the landlord's taxes has gone up, how much the landlord's insurance has gone up, and how much maintenance has gone up. Now, 2 points about TMI that you should all learn, and if you're taking notes, this is very important. TMI can include HST, all right? Now, don't be scared about that, because if the tenant has to pay HST, it becomes an input tax credit. We've talked a lot about HST, and by now you guys should all know what an input tax credit is. The second point, though, is often what landlords do, and you have to really be careful about this, is they have an administration fee. So they have a TMI of $1,000 a month, and I'm just making that up, obviously, of $1,000 a month, but I have seen administration fees of as high as 20% on top of TMI. So it's not just taxes, maintenance, and insurance. It should be like taxes, maintenance, insurance, and admin fee. And in some plazas, shopping plazas, shopping centers, even some standalone buildings that the landlord has their own contract, all right? You better make sure that the the tenant has read that contract or had the lawyer's review of that contract to learn about admin fees, because they can be very, very, very expensive, okay? Be careful there. Zoning, I think we've talked about zoning enough. I think I'd bore you to death if I went into zoning again. Parking as well. We've talked a lot about parking. And can there be leasehold improvements? First of all, what is a leasehold improvement? A leasehold improvement is something that the tenant does to the property, okay? When it is a rental. A leasehold improvement basically means that there is a fixture being added to the property. The fixture could be a wall. It could be a new bathroom, new washroom. In a warehouse setting, what about office space? You could rent a warehouse that doesn't have an office in it, and then the tenant puts their own office in. Now, as we talked about last week, and I thank Christopher for reminding me about this, there can be what's called a fixturing period, where the tenant is allowed to go into the place and do leaseholds and basically not pay any rent or not pay any TMI. Then there's a rent-free period as well, sometimes, where there's a rent-free period where their leasehold improvements could be done, but the tenant does pay TMI. And then, of course, when the actual official date of rent starts, the tenant would pay base rent plus TMI. So leasehold improvement, who pays? I hope one of you or two of you or three of you or four of you get into 20,000 square foot rentals where you'll make a lot of money, where sometimes the landlord will pay for the leasehold improvements, but the amount that he spends on those leasehold improvements is basically added to the rent at the end of the day. And the tenant, month after month after month, pays the landlord back. So any of those scenarios can happen with leasehold improvements, and you always have to look at what the tenant is looking for, what kind of changes to the property have to be made. And of course, if it's a buyer, leasehold improvements don't come into the picture, but things like parking and zoning and washrooms and square feet all do. So these common property features are kind of a combination between buyers and tenants at the same time. No questions? Great.
Yes, John, I have questions.
Sure.
Yes. So for the client saying the net MOI, and then they have the TMI as well. So when we calculate the cap rate, we're not include the TMI, right?
The net operating income of a business would include TMI, yes, as an expense.
He like they saying like separate they saying like MOI and then plus the TMI separate. So
no. So what is net operating income? Net operating income, it has the revenue and expenses of the business. And the expense portion would be the rental amount and the TMI. Okay.
Okay, sorry. So
no, don't be sorry. It's okay.
So it's they send the rental income, and then the TMI correct. So when we calculate how to calculate the cap rate, so in the spreadsheet it has the MOI. I'm not sorry, have the rental income. Like in the plaza, the gas station, how much it costs, how much the dental, how much the Tim Hortons. So they add up for each year, and then they will say okay, for each of the property, how much TMI they correct. So when I want to calculate the cap rate, how much do I like?
Well,
calculate.
this has got nothing to do with the cap rate, first of all. Okay, so the revenue, if you're talking about a plaza, in a the revenue for the plaza would be the rent plus TMI. Okay, would be the revenue, and then the expenses for the plaza would have taxes, it would have maintenance, it would have insurance, because the landlord, the owner of the plaza in this case, is going to collect all that base rent and TMI, but then he's going to have the expenses as well. And in those expenses will be taxes, maintenance, and insurance that he has spent. It's got nothing to do with the cap rate. Okay, not yet. All right. Cap rate is calculated on the net operating income at the bottom, okay, of the income statement. All right. If you're going to use a cap rate, you would use it, not multiply or divide, but you would use the net operating income after TMI has been already in the net operating income. It would be in the income statement already.
Okay. It's very confused when they send me the rental income, and then they say, okay, the TMI correct. So they plus together have another number. So the client asked me how much is the cap rate. So I'm really confused.
Well, the cap rate would be calculated on the net operating income, the bottom number. And it's ANSI. This is ANSI, right?
Yes.
Okay, Angie, so what we'll do afterwards is send that to me and I'll show you, okay?
Oh, okay.
No problem.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Any other questions? Okay. So when you're looking for office space, purchase or lease, public access, all right? Once again, my dental office is on the 3rd floor. Doesn't need a storefront, right? Handicap access. It's got an elevator, all right? Storefront and signage. This is always a really big one. Okay, what is this? What can a tenant, or if it's a purchase, what signage can be allowed? There are many, many, many sign laws out there. Oh my goodness gracious. I once saw Richmond Hill's sign bylaw when that whole thing about open houses was going on, and could you put a sign out for an open house, if some of you would recall from Richmond Hill. I think the Richmond Hill sign bylaw was 86 or 87 pages of the smallest fine print I've ever seen in my life. And that's just Richmond Hill, the sign bylaws. It's really, really tricky sometimes. You really do have to make sure that you understand what the tenant or the purchaser's sign requirements are, okay? Hours of operation, very important. If you're leasing a place in a plaza, does the store have to be open from 9 till 9, 7 days a week? And if it's a plaza, you know what, or a mall, the answer is yes. You have to be there. You're signing a contract that you have to be there, and that store has to be open. It can't open at 9:15 in the morning. If the mall hours are 9 to 9, it's 9 to 9. All right. So do be aware of that for sure. Some buildings, little plazas that have restaurants, there's sometimes some flexibility. For example, some stores may be open at 9 o'clock till 9 o'clock, but your tenant is renting a pizza restaurant that doesn't open till 11 o'clock in the morning. And you can negotiate that with some plaza owners, okay? Separate offices and cubicles, do you need separate offices? And what about security? I know some people, trying to think of an example, do the money exchange place. Well, what kind of security do you need in a money exchange place? I'd say pretty good security. I don't know if any of you have been into the jewelry store in the mall at, I'm sorry, in the plaza at Elgin Mills and Young, but there's a jewelry store there that the security getting in there, The doors on the outside is locked. They have a video camera on you. They unlock the door and you go into a waiting room that is locked, and there's a video camera, and there's actually a speaker comes on in this little waiting area that says, "Can we help you?" And you have to explain why you want to come into the jewelry store. The security is unbelievable. So do be careful about security as well for some people, all right? It's very, very important. Warehouse space. Warehouse space is a whole different kettle of fish. Loading bays. Loading bays are very important for truck height, all right? Sometimes people just need a little small warehouse just to store a little bit of furniture that they're importing from Italy. Maybe they're not importing from Italy today, but you guys know what I mean. And they only need a pickup truck to back up to a loading bay. Sometimes they have a 20-foot truck that they have to back up to a loading bay. Sometimes there's a 40-foot truck that they have to back up to a loading bay. And I don't know if Bob Marabi's with us here today or not, but Bob ran into... Bob, what was that side loading thing called again, where you had to go down the hill?
The side loading for the truck?
Yeah, side loading, thank you, yeah. Side loading.
It's just side loading.
Side loading, where the truck actually goes down a ramp and then can unload from the side. Thank you, Bob. You know, so there's all sorts of different loading bays and different looks of loading bays, okay? With that, of course, our garage door heights. You know, is it an 8-foot garage? Is it a 10-foot garage? Is it a 20-foot garage? All sorts of things. Truck parking is another huge one. You might be able to come into a place and unload and unload, but guess what? You're not allowed to park overnight. So be careful there. For large warehousing, some people, and once again, when we get into the big stuff like 10,000 square feet and 20,000 square feet, what about surplus land for growth? Okay. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with Mayfield and Dixie Road in Mississauga. Mayfield and Dixie Road, there's some huge warehouses going up there. There's the Amazon warehouse, of course, up there. There's a Grange and can't remember the name. And now there's another warehouse going up behind those, and I don't know if it's going to be the Amazon extension or the Grange extension. But oh my goodness gracious, it's just going up hugely. So people have bought and built warehouses, and now they're building warehouses behind their warehouses so that they have more warehouses. Oh my goodness. So I hope you experience that one day. Warehouses, office space, as I mentioned, there's lots of people out there looking for warehouse space, and you can find an empty space, but are you permitted to put an office in it? All right. Humidity, now we're talking about something like a Costco. Cold storage, clothing storage. They still have fur storage warehouses in downtown Toronto where humidity is hugely important. Places, once again, like Costco, what about refrigeration? Interior height, you can see in the picture, there's a forklift. You know, I don't know if this is a Costco picture or not. I can't remember where I got the picture from. But interior height can be hugely, hugely important in warehouse space for people, depending on what they are storing and what the purpose of the warehouse is. And the only way you're going to find this stuff out is to talk to the person that is looking for space. The other parts about warehouses is floor load capacity. What is the floor load capacity? Floor load capacity is the amount of weight that can be put on a particular floor, okay? Got to be very careful about floor load capacity if you're getting into something bigger. Weigh scales, you know, depending on what the use is, does the property need a weigh scale? Trucks are coming in and out. You want the truck to be weighed before it leaves, because as you guys all are aware, on highways, you know, the 400 going north is where I can think of one right away, has weigh scales on it that the trucks, you know, and trucks must enter here when lights are flashing. I'm sure you guys have all seen that, trucks do not want to be fined by the ministry that they're overweight. And so, because overweight trucks are dangerous, that, some businesses have weigh scales before the truck leaves the lot to make sure that it meets the ministry guidelines. Warehouses also have electrical considerations. What's being put in the warehouse, for example, if there's going to be refrigeration, what is the electrical requirements? It's not just your standard house that you plug in a fridge. We're talking, 600 volts, 600 amps as a big electrical load. And some warehouses, of course, lunchrooms, where you can, Costco is a great example. I'm sure we've all been to a washroom in Costco, and usually the lunchroom is, you usually walk by it on the way to the washroom, right? I know the one in Newmarket is like that, the one in Barrie's like that, the one in Mississauga is like that as well. So these are all questions and conversations that you need to have with your tenants or buyers. Oh, it'd be great if it was a buyer, you guys, about exactly what they are looking for. Any questions about warehouses? All right. Mechanical. Mechanical is common. I know as the manager of the Richmond Hill office, we're doing quite well. We were, and we will again, do quite a few of these. There's quite a few people looking for garages, carpenters looking for space, welders, absolutely. Just about any kind of mechanical. I think I've seen just about every kind of lease go through us. Loading bay height, once again, the overall height, the garage door height, the floor load capacity. Is there a basement? This is really an important question. For storage, yes, but if you're looking at a garage, maybe some of us, I know I have been, into like a Jiffy Lube, where the car is not necessarily put up on a hoist like the picture. You just drive in and the guy's in the basement with all his parts and he changes your oil from underneath. Not from on top, right? And so basements can be important for storage and for access to whatever they are doing. Electrical capacity, once again, really important. Fluid retention. So if there's a garage, what are they doing with all the old oil? Okay. What are they doing with all the leftover windshield wiper fluid, antifreeze, transmission fluid that they are changing? What's happening with all that stuff? You don't want to be renting a garage to somebody that's perfect, but they're not allowed to put a WM, a waste management bin that collects oil. They're not allowed to put that on the exterior of the property. You need to make sure that wherever this is, that you're allowed to do that. Okay, so watch out for fluid retention. Air ventilation. Air ventilation is another really important one. When I think about woodworking shops, well-organized woodworking shops have huge air ventilation systems, but where is the exit of that air ventilation system going to? It better not be blowing out onto the parking lot. All right, it better be going somewhere that is safe and meets ministry guidelines. All right, in a garage, air ventilation, in a welding shop. I don't know if any of you have ever been in a welding shop, but air ventilation is hugely important in a welding shop. There's all sorts of noxious chemicals, and it makes me think of Bob again in printing shops. Right, Bob? I mean, you in a printing shop, you need to have good air ventilation because of all the chemicals that are being used in a printing shop. And so you do have to be careful about air ventilation. Crane or overhead lift, sometimes this is very important in a garage where the garage is big enough where you're going to swap a motor out of a vehicle because the motor's bad, or even the transmission needs to be changed. These things are heavy, to put it mildly. How are the workers moving all the heavy stuff around? Does the roof have the capacity to have an overhead lift made on it? Can you weld something on it that will work? All those kind of questions. And last but not least, I think, is office space. Of course, you need to have the office space as well. So each type of garage, welding, woodworking, whatever, you know, could be furniture manufacturers, anything that's being made, they probably have specific requirements. Now, can you guys be experts in all of this? And the answer is no, you cannot be. But you don't need to be an expert in a woodworking shop, all right? Nobody is except the person who wants to open the woodworking shop. But should you have a general idea of the questions to ask? And the answer is yes. What kind of air ventilation do you need for a woodworking shop? Do you need some kind of specific garage door height or loading bay so that trucks can come into it? That kind of thing, so that you look like you're a professional in the business. Do you need to know that the garage door height has to be 10 feet? No. The tenant or the buyer needs to know what the garage door height should be. Should you know to ask the question if it's specifically something that the tenant or the buyer is looking for? What garage door height are you looking for this unit? All right, you don't need to know that it's 10 feet or 12 feet. The person who's buying or renting needs to know that answer. You don't need to know the answer. You just need to know the question. All right. Any questions for mechanical?
No question.
Oh, God, I'm getting off easy. Retail. We did talk about this a little bit, hours of operation. We talked about this in the office space, of course, but it's also very, very important for retail, hours of operation. Shelving and fixtures. Oh, what a great discussion shelving and fixtures is with retail. So let's just say now that the tenant, we'll talk about a tenant, rents a spot that doesn't have any shelving on it, all right? The tenant screws all sorts of things into the wall, all the shelving into the wall, okay? The tenant needs a lease that says at the end of the lease, the landlord agrees that the tenant can take the shelving with them. If not, the shelving becomes a fixture and the tenant cannot remove it. All right, I'll give you a specific example of a restaurant where the tenant installed a range hood fan, okay? He was permitted to do this, all right? In the lease agreement, he was permitted to put a hole in the ceiling, all right? To put a vent out. He installed the range hood fan himself, okay? And the lease ended, and the tenant started to take the range hood fan out of the place, and the landlord said, no way, it's mine. And the landlord wins. It's a fixture now. You need to have this stuff written in the lease. Be careful, all right? Be very, very careful. There was actually just a lawsuit. Actually, I don't think it went to court, but it was certainly mediated, where somebody had rented it was a restaurant where there was all sorts of fixtures on the wall. The new tenant assumed that the fixtures would be there. The previous tenant had removed them all, and the previous tenant was made to put them all back because there was nothing in the lease, okay? So be careful when it comes to shelving, all right? And different fixtures that your tenant might be installing, the tenant has to understand that unless there is something specific in the lease, fixtures become the property of the landlord. Be careful. Lighting. Of course, lighting in retail is important, okay? And with lighting, of course, if there's not sufficient lighting to start, and the tenant certainly intends to install new lighting, does the property have the electrical capacity to have all that lighting newly installed. What is in the breaker panel? I'll get to the chat in just 1 second. What is in the breaker panel? Is there a place that they can put in more lighting? Does it have the electrical capacity? So be careful. And storage, of course, does it have a basement? What about a little room at the back that people can store stuff? What about a loading bay door at the back? You know, that kind of a thing. Some plazas do not allow deliveries through the front door. You have to only go through the back door. Well, at the back door, is it all stairs coming up? Like, what is it? And so you do have to be careful about storage as well. Just let me have a look here. 1 second. Yeah, absolutely, Sheila. Absolutely. The landlord and the tenant agree that any shelving or fixtures attached to the unit throughout the term of the lease can be removed by the tenant at the expiration of the lease, and the landlord and tenant both sign it. Absolutely, 100%. That's the whole idea. Good question. Any other questions about retail? Medical and dental. Lots of people know people who are dentists that are looking for things. That's all I know for sure. Oh my goodness. Lots of dentists looking. Of course, if you're looking for a dental place, if you're looking in a plaza and there's a dental office already, you don't even look further. You know, you can contact the property management company and find out if the existing dental office has exclusivity to that plaza, and usually the answer is yes. But assuming that you find a place that is suitable, what about water supply? Like, assuming that some of the parameters that we talked about in the first two slides, like, you know, the square footage is good, signage is good, public access is good, maybe washrooms. But what about water supply for a dentist? It would be a real bummer if you had a dental office and you've rented it, and he goes, well, now let's get things going, and there you can't get water supply, right? And so do think about water supply for sure. How many free months can we get in general? Depends, Mina. It depends on it's a great question, Mina. It depends on the free months. It depends on the leasehold improvements that are going to be done. So if a person is going to rent a restaurant and the restaurant is totally set up, the tables and the chairs and the stove and the fridge and the range hood, everything is there already, you're probably not going to get any free months, all right? If the place is vacant and the person wants to run a restaurant and now has to do a ton of leasehold improvements, you can often get a fixturing period for 2 or 3 months where the tenant pays nothing. And then perhaps you get a couple of free months rent, but the tenant pays TMI. So every situation can be different, Mina. I can't say for sure, but I would hazard a guess that what I generally see is 2 months free rent, okay? But during that 2 months free rent, we're talking about small places here, 2 months free rent, but during that time period, it's free rent. It's not a fixturing period, it's free rent. And that free rent is base rent only, and the person does have to pay TMI. The tenant does have to pay TMI. And so you do want to be a little bit careful. You can try for anything. I know some people try for all sorts of things, and it's often a negotiated part with the tenant and the landlord, but I often see 2 months, Mina, for small places like a dental office. Somebody wants to run a little retail shop and do a few things to it, that kind of stuff. I often see 2 months, okay? Water supply. Waste disposal, once again. I mean, what's happening in a dental office to all the swabs that they've got into your mouth? I mean, I'm not trying to be rude or anything like that, but what's happening How is the dentist taking care of all that? What is happening with all that stuff anyway? So you have to be careful. Some medical dental offices have private washrooms, like I said earlier, my dental office does not. It's a communal washroom down the hall kind of thing. Reception area, of course, is another question. How big of a reception area, and where people can wait. Clinical rooms. I know that one person rented an office, and they made sure that they could expand. And so as the dental business grew, and now maybe they need a hygienist, and now maybe they need a second hygienist, and what about a little room to take those big x-rays of your whole head that they do in some dental offices, that kind of thing. But once again, when it comes to a medical dental office, these guys, the doctors, medical, physiotherapists, dentists, even massage therapists, that kind of thing, they know what they need, all right? You have to inquire. A dentist isn't coming into this world being a dentist and has no clue what they need. They know exactly what they need. Ask the questions. Once again, you guys don't need to know the answers. You just need to know the questions, all right, to ask, all right? So keep that in mind, all right? Lots of medical dental stuff being rented out there. My goodness gracious, it's a big part of business out there. Oh, I'm sorry. Any questions about medical, dental, massage, physiotherapy, any of those kind of things? Any questions?
Hi, John. For the commission, okay, when we have the 2 months free in the lease, the commission is based on 10 months or for the 12 months?
Well, if it is free rent, you are going to get your commission on 10 months rent if it's 2 months free rent. Then you would get the following year 12 months, the following year 12 months, the following year 12 months. Okay. It also, Christopher brought this up last week as well. It also depends on what, and this has been a bone of contention in the leasing world, is what is the commencement date of the lease? And some businesses, I'm sorry, some realtors say your commission is based on the commencement date. Some say it's based on the start date. So it is a bit of a gray area, Bob, to be honest with you. Okay. Let's just see here.
Thank you.
Duration of rent in commercials can be more than 1 year. Oh, absolutely, Sheila. And so generally, when you look at an MLS listing for commercial, it'll have a term. It'll say 12/60 as an example, or 12/48 as an example. So what that would mean is that what the landlord is looking for is they are looking for a 1 year lease with an option of 48 more months, 4 more years. It could say 5 years and 5 years, 60 and 60. The landlord is looking for a 60-month lease and 60 months after that as a second term, okay? So in those cases, let's say it's a 24 and 36. So the landlord's looking for a 2-year lease with an option for a further 3 years, okay? Often that 2 years is at the same rental rate for the 2-year term. And then the next one, the option year, the rental rate would be negotiated. Sometimes it can be negotiated in advance when the whole thing is set up. That's not common, but it does happen. And more often what happens is that the second term is, in the lease, it says something like 3 months prior to the expiration of the first term, the rent will be negotiated for the second term. and failing which, there's two choices after that. If the landlord and tenant cannot agree, then it's all over. Or there's another clause that says that for the second term, if the tenant and the landlord cannot agree, then they can hire appraisers. The appraisers will give them what the actual rent is for that, and they agree on that, okay, because the appraisers have given them the actual market rent that is fair. Okay, so yes, Sheila, absolutely. Landlords love to get a 5-year lease with a 5-year option. That is very common. The tenant is responsible for that 5 years, so better be careful. Brand new businesses, a lot of new tenants into a brand new business only really want a 1 or 2 year lease and then a 3 or 4 year second term to see if their business survives. Now, landlords don't like that because now you've got a tenant for 1 year, and if it doesn't work, you know, the landlord has to find a new tenant. And, you know, obviously landlords want longer leases. Okay. Okay, good. Any other questions right now? Okay. Heavy industrial. At this stage of most of your careers, and 1 or 2 of you out there might be into this actually, but heavy industrial is a different ball of wax again, but a lot of it's the same as warehousing. Loading bay height, once again, garage door height, once again, floor load capacity, obviously huge. So my brother-in-law is in the printing business. They run a huge, huge warehouse, and it's a heavy industrial unit. The printing presses that they have are the equivalent of about 4 locomotives that pull trains, and they've got 7 of these printing presses in their industrial warehouse. They had to go through huge engineering tests for floor load capacity. So I was in there about a year ago, and he's showing me around. It's quite the performance in there, I have to tell you. But he was showing me around, and we came to this whole kind of walled off area, and he opened the door and he said, "Be careful." And you walked about 4 feet, and there was a 20-foot pit that had gone down through the floor. They had dug up the floor and had dug 20 feet down. And I said, "What the heck is this for?" And he said, "Oh, we're getting a new printing press, and we have to strengthen the floor to be able to hold the weight of the new printing press." Think about 3 or 4 locomotives in size, this printing press, and how heavy that is. And so they were going through this whole engineering and structural change in the floor in this one area to hold a new printing press. It was quite something. Electrical capacity. He showed me the electrical room in this printing business, their printing shop. The electrical room is the size of about a 2,000 square foot house. It is unbelievable, the electrical capacity. Environmental, of course, is really important. Air ventilation, huge fans in this place, unbelievable. And of course, office space as well. So heavy industrial is a whole different ball of wax again. I don't know if too many of you guys are going to get into this right off the bat. You may be in more of the smaller retail, office, medical, dental kind of thing to start, but you should be aware of the basics of heavy industrial just to be on the safe side. Any questions about heavy industrial? Franchises. Franchises are things that people are selling in Century 21 Heritage Group for sure. And it's really quite simple, guys. It is all about the franchise agreement, okay? It is all about the net operating income, and you will always require a non-disclosure agreement, okay? It is all about the franchise agreement. There are huge clauses for lawyers' review in franchise agreements. Unfortunately, I know of a couple franchises agreements that just fell apart for deals because the buyers said, wait a second, I don't want to be getting into a restaurant business today. And you know what? Can't blame them. You know, if you had a deal at the beginning of March for a franchise for a restaurant, oh my goodness, that deal is probably not going to work out very well today because you can't really open your business. That kind of thing, unfortunately, COVID-19 has had an impact on that. But the franchise agreement is everything. Do you need to be an expert in reading the franchise agreement? And the answer is no, absolutely not. Do you need to know where the clauses are for franchise agreements? We talked about this. Does anybody want to take a stab at the clause number? Bob knows what it is. I know you do, Bob. No? How about C519, you guys? C519 has it, okay? Has a whole bunch of stuff and all sorts of things. Let's see, Latin. Do franchises sell assets or shares if they are established? Franchises are generally selling the assets of their business, all right? Now, if you were the franchisor, not the franchisee, Latin, then you would probably sell shares if you were selling part of your whole franchise business. If Tim Hortons ever wanted to sell their whole business, not just a franchise, they would sell the shares of the business. So it depends on what they're doing. On exactly that question. So I believe that most of them are doing asset sales unless it's the actual franchisor and then they're selling their whole business. Okay, so franchises. All about, sorry, I switched pages there, excuse me. So franchises. Yeah, franchises can be tricky. Sometimes there's a lot of training involved for the franchisee, the person who's buying it. They have to go through training things. Sometimes those trainings are far away. I know, I can't remember what it was, but somebody had to travel to California recently for training, if I remember last year, something like that, I forget. All sorts of things that franchisees have to jump through to be able to do this, okay? But it happens, definitely. And that's it for buyers or tenants. Any questions at all about buyers and tenants and the different types of businesses that we've talked about? Are there any questions about any of these?
John,
Awesome.
hi, Barry here. What is in the last slide that you already showed, what is the non-disclosure? And also there is a second question of mine is that regarding to the questions that we should ask for the tenants or the buyers, do we have any questionnaire or a guideline that we can refer to? Thanks.
No problem. So a non-disclosure agreement. A non-disclosure agreement, there are two non-disclosure agreements available to you. There's an Ontario Real Estate Association non-disclosure agreement, and the non-disclosure agreement is between two or more parties. For example, that the buyer wants to see the net operating income, the seller doesn't want to give the net operating income until the buyer has given a non-disclosure agreement that the buyer is not going to share the information given with anybody else. Okay, that non-disclosure agreement can be between brokerages. So we are the cooperating brokerage, and the listing brokerage wants to send us a non-disclosure agreement that we will only share it with the buyer, the information given. If that's the case, then of course you would have to have a non-disclosure agreement with the buyer, so the buyer is not going to share it with anybody else. There's also another form that covers everybody all in one big form. So you do have those choices of non-disclosure agreements. And I believe that they are in your Google Drive, well, not the area one, the area one's a form, of course. When you look at commercial sale or commercial tenant in your transaction desk, the non-disclosure agreement is in there. The second question was, I'm sorry, Beirut, what was the second question?
The second was, do we have a question regarding to the requirement of the buyer or the person who is renting?
Yep, so thank you. I have a good memory, but it's short. Yes, in the paper packages in the office, which of course you can't get your hands on now, there's definitely a commercial questionnaire. And I believe that commercial questionnaire is in the transaction desk as well. You know what, I have to double check that now. I'm just making myself a note that is it in there. So just let me write that down. Commercial questionnaire. But I have to tell you, and if it's not in transaction desk, I'll make sure it gets put in there. But it is very, very, very general. It's got more of what we talked about at the beginning. It's got more of these questions. Hang on, just let me go really quickly here. It's got more of the common property features on it. Okay, it doesn't have every single different type of different space or purchase or lease space like what we've been through, because we have pages and pages and pages and pages of questions. So it's pretty generic, Beirut, okay? But I will make sure that it's in transaction desk if it's not there already, okay?
Yeah, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Any other questions for buyers or tenants? Okay. For sellers, these 4 steps, okay? I don't know if anybody will recognize these 4 steps, but I have copied these 4 steps right out of the commercial textbook for when you went to the Ontario Real Estate Association College, all right? You guys have seen these 4 steps before, all right? The first step for sellers, inquire. Ask the specific questions of the seller concerning matters such as roofs, water seepage, and the condition of HVAC, plumbing, and electrical systems, okay? If you're a residential agent, it's pretty easy to go into the basement and see the hot water tank and see if it's leaking. It's pretty easy to go into the basement of a house and see the furnace, all right? In fact, you can look at the furnace. It always has a date of manufacture tag on a furnace in a residential house, and you can see how old it is. It's simple, all right? If you're looking at a property that is for sale, that's an industrial unit, a warehouse unit, maybe even a plaza, a couple of stores. It could be 3 commercial units on the downstairs and 4 residential units on the upstairs. Figuring out what's good with roofs and water and HVAC and plumbing and electrical systems is a whole different story. On a warehouse, you're never going to see the roof, you guys. It's a flat roof. You're never going to tell what's going on up there. So now we're starting to talk about latent and patent defects. What does the landlord know about the equipment that is on the property? It would be great if the landlord said the roof was replaced last year. We just installed new air conditioning 3 years ago. HVAC stands for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, in case nobody knows. What's the story in plumbing? What's the story of electrical systems? Right, you need to ask these questions, okay? Investigate, all right? Don't be scared to walk around, all right? Let's just say a more common one, I think, for this group, not necessarily a heavy industrial building, but that example where it's got 3 commercial units on the downstairs and 3 residential units upstairs. You need to have a look around, you guys. You know, don't be scared. In a house, if you were with a seller, you would wander around the whole house, right, to determine its value. Commercial is no different. You need to wander around the whole place. For example, you're going into a warehouse and it's filthy dirty. You go into a garage and the washroom in the garage is, well, I think we've all experienced some washrooms in garages that aren't the most sanitary, shall we say. Some of them are downright gross. You need to check this out. You know, you need to talk to them and see these things. Don't be scared to wander around and ask questions, all right? Verify, all right? Point out deficiencies to the seller based on your personal investigation. Geez, Mr. Seller, you know, the bathroom is not really in great shape. If you want to get a good dollar for this place, maybe you should fix it up. No different than going into a residential property where the garage is packed full of stuff, junk. You should be saying to your seller, to get maximum value for your house, perhaps you should clean out your garage, all right? I hope none of you guys are going into a house that's dirty and just ignoring it. You have to tell the seller to get the place cleaned up if they want maximum value. And guess what? Commercial is no different. Latent defects must be disclosed to a buyer. Okay? You must allow the buyer disclosing, and you must allow the buyer sufficient time to investigate such items further. And when it comes to selling, of course, buyers have long conditional time periods. We've talked about financing. That's usually one of the longest, all right? And so I've seen many, many deals for commercial properties that, you know what, most of the conditions end on the same time as the financing condition ends. I've seen that. And once again, when we're talking about conditions in an offer, just as a reminder to you, I got asked this question just yesterday. Don't put down 60 business days. Okay, 60 business days, boy, are you just opening yourself up for confusion on when the 60th day is? Okay, put down a specific time and date in your conditions. I know we're talking about buyers here for a second. I've gone off track a little bit from sellers, but instead of 60 business days, where are we today, April 17th? Put down June 17th at 5 p.m. I don't know if that's a Saturday or a Sunday, by the way. But put down in a specific time and date so that you're not counting days, all right? It's going to make everybody's life a lot easier. In 5 business days for residential, yeah, that's easy to figure out. 45 business days, oh my goodness, we all have our calendars out and we're counting, and was the Monday a banking holiday or a statutory holiday? Oh my goodness, so be careful with that, okay? Sellers. Common features of a property for sale or lease. We've talked about this. NOI, share or asset sale, for sale exposure, public or exclusive. What about chattels? What about equipment? What is included? You know what? Just ran into one a few weeks ago, just before the you-know-what hit the fan here, where the person closed and a chattel was not in the property. Okay, that was in the property, and the buyer said, oh, but the seller said he was going to leave it, and it's not here. And my first question was, show me the chattel list. And that item was not on the chattel list. Get it in writing when it comes to chattels and equipment. You guys always have Schedule A that have the conditions and clauses. There's usually Schedule B that shows where what happens to interest gained on the deposit when it's in the trust account. And then you have Schedule C that often has the chattels. And if you recall from last week, we talked about condition C516. C516, that condition says that the seller has such and such a time to give a chattel list to be included as, and then it says schedule blank, and you put in Schedule C or Schedule D, and that the buyer has a chance to review the chattels. It's really important. So you need to know what's included and what's not included in the business, of course. Leased equipment. If you're doing a residential sale, the leased equipment is the hot water tank, right? What about leased equipment in a sale of a property that is commercial? In restaurants, There's all sorts of leased equipment. Boy, you can lease just about anything in a restaurant. You can actually lease the pots and pans from Pope Restaurant Supply. You can lease refrigerators. You can lease display cases. Okay, rent to own places. Restaurants often do rent to owns. Here's tables and chairs and more tables and chairs and more tables and chairs. And it's on a rent to own system, just the same way as in a residential property that a furnace could be on a rent to own system. This is common, you guys. You need to ask these questions, okay, from your seller. Of course, permitted uses. Zoning and condos, of course, you've got to know what this is. Exclusivity, we've talked about that. We've talked a lot about NOI and cash businesses. This is just a bit of a reminder. What about stock? What about inventory? How is that going to be figured out? There's all sorts of inventory clauses out there. For the three of you who did your homework, I'm sure you've run into them. All sorts of stock and inventory clauses out there. What about the availability? Same as a residential. When do you want to sell, right? Status of employees, if any, and don't forget to ask questions, all right? Lots and lots and lots of questions. You don't need to know the answers. You just need to know the questions. So before we do that, so just ask questions, you guys. This is still, what I'm worried about is, what a lot of people are talking about is that the real estate environment, the whole landscape's going to change to technological advances, right? Everything is becoming virtual this and virtual that and all that stuff. It doesn't mean that this does not remain a relationship business. And how do you establish a good business relationship? Is you show the professionalism that you have, whether it's virtual or not. All right, there's still a telephone, you guys. You can still pick up the phone and call people, but you've got to know the questions. And I think this whole commercial training week 7 is all about not knowing. You don't need to know the answers. You need to know the questions. All right. And so don't forget to ask questions, ask questions, ask questions. The more questions that you ask, and I think it's a failing of real estate agents, is that sometimes they think that they're being silly by asking all these questions. You guys don't need to know the answers. You just need to know the questions. And the person at the other end of the phone, or if you're face-to-face meeting them, which will happen again, thank goodness, they're going to think that you're doing the right thing. You're asking the right questions. You know what you're talking about. All right. So before we get to the homework, any questions? There, I love it. I have to ask questions. Any questions?
John, I do have a question.
Sure.
In residential, we have home inspectors that we can call to do an inspection before putting a house on the market and so on.
Sure.
In commercial, are there professionals that you can call to come in to inspect equipment and so on? Like someone like myself would not know to, what certain like equipment.
Right. No, great question. Thank you. So the best way to say this is that there are a few inspectors out there that specialize in commercial, but they're very rare ducks. They really, really are rare. What they do in commercial is similar to in residential. I'll give you an example. In residential, when there's a swimming pool, okay, the house has a swimming pool. Your general home inspector is not going to inspect the swimming pool, all right? Generally not, all right? Often what I see is that an inspection is that you're going to hire a professional from the swimming pool business, okay, to inspect the swimming pool. And when it comes to commercial, you would hire a professional in the certain area that you need. So for an example is the electrical inspection, all right? You would hire a professional electrical contractor that is not a residential, but a commercial electrical inspector. You would hire a person who's familiar with the type of furnace that is in, like who installed the furnace? Well, let's get them back here to inspect it. Who installed the swimming pool? Let's get that person back here to inspect it, okay? Who installed the ventilation system? Let's get that person back here to inspect it, all right? That's more so of what you do, okay?
Okay, good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Good question. Any other questions? Okay. Homework. For those of you who love doing homework, and once again, that last one was a hard one. Congratulations to the 3 people who did it. Homework, complete form 511. This is the commercial short form. Use this MLS number, please. All right. I'd like to see 2 months free rent, 36 months with an option for 60 months, minimum of the 5 best clauses in Schedule A. You don't have to put any times and dates in if you don't want to, okay, where this is just a practice thing. I'd like you to include a clause for an additional security deposit. Don't forget to mention TMI somewhere. Have a good look at the form, okay? And if you can, hand in the homework by next week, Wednesday, so I can get it back to you in time before the next class.